small microeconomies. And when we talk about finance, one of the biggest single financial challenges that we have is investment in resilience building or capital or infrastructure development. Now, for small island economies or small economies, microeconomies, if you like, the cost of infrastructure investment is disproportionately higher than it is for even poorer countries, but of larger economic scale. So it's a challenge for countries like us to try and find financing to build resilience on key infrastructure, whether it's airstrips that are in our remote islands, whether it's port facilities, which are important for facilitating trade, or whether it's public buildings like schools and so forth. Traditionally, the means of financing these are through your own revenues that you generate, through donor funds, but if you graduate to high income status like a country like ours, these access to concessional financing is restricted, or through borrowing. And again, when you graduate to higher income status, your ability to borrow is made more expensive because of your status that you have been assessed under the OECD's criteria. So being regarded as a high income country will penalize you if you are a very small economy in being unable to access financing at concessional rates. Which brings us to climate financing, and that again has its own challenges, as many of you will no doubt be aware in your own countries. Accessing funds from the likes of the Green Climate Fund is quite a tremendous exercise in itself. So with these challenges put before us, our country has been advocating for many years, along with other countries in a similar situation, for reform in our financial architecture and the structure of our MDBs. It's therefore pleasing, and I congratulate the Asian Development Bank in particular, who recently announced a new financing initiative, particularly aimed at small economy countries like ours, for much more concessional borrowing terms and conditions. These include borrowing up to 40 years with a 10-year grace period at a 1% interest rate. A much affordable, more affordable terms and conditions of borrowing than had been available to countries like ours. But what they are doing is echoing, I guess, the calls that have been made not just by countries like ourselves, but we've heard this from the likes of the Prime Minister of Barbados as well when she speaks about long money, because it is unreasonable to expect small island economies in particular to have to borrow to build resilience against the impacts of climate change, the impacts which are not caused by small island states. The Pacific alone is responsible for 0.03% of carbon emissions, total global carbon emissions. So this is an impact that has not been caused by us, but small island states are having to bear on a proportional basis the brunt of the cost to protect ourselves against the impacts of climate change. One of the other things when you mention about strategies, well, this is not a strategy, this is now a reality. What the Pacific has done is, along the lines of our 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, is to design and now to stand up and implement our own financing facility to address our resilience building and adaptation challenges. So the Pacific Resilience Facility was endorsed by Pacific leaders just last month at their leaders' meeting in the Pacific. We were very pleased to have Saudi Arabia contribute $50 million towards this particular fund to begin seeding this particular fund. And this is a fund that was born out of necessity for many of our countries that found it difficult to access climate financing in a way that was affordable, but also timely. This facility is not seen as a competitor to the likes of the Green Climate Fund. Indeed, it should be seen as a complementary partner to the GCF, where rather than the GCF having to work individually with individual Pacific countries, putting in proposals, there is an opportunity to scale its contributions directly to the Pacific through this disbursement vehicle that we have designed to ensure that the funding that goes into the Pacific Resilience Facility does go towards meeting those specific resilience needs of our Pacific Island countries. And to give you an idea, we're talking about, in some cases, projects that are counted in the thousands of dollars rather than in the millions of dollars, as you would from larger areas such as in Asia or Africa, where the demands are much, much greater due to, again, proportionality, the population size, and so forth. So having this particular facility for us is a start, if you like, of taking acknowledgement of our unique challenges that we have as small island states, putting out a solution to those who are serious about supporting initiatives in our Pacific region for building resilience. We've designed a facility that you can contribute towards, knowing that these resources will go to where they're needed. And for us in the Pacific, we've seen the impacts of extreme weather conditions, but also what we see is the impacts of the slow onset impacts of climate change, the gradual erosion of our low-lying atolls, the need to build basic foreshore protection. This is something that our people in our islands have been doing for hundreds of years. They know how to protect themselves against the ocean when you live 5 meters above sea level. But what we're seeing is the impacts of their very much low technology, low cost resilience measures, which are basic seawalls around their properties on the islands. These are being worn away much quicker. So it needs a bit more strength to build them up, such as cement, to be able to lock the stones together. These are projects that are not implemented by international companies. These are projects implemented by communities themselves. What they need is added resources to be able to allow them to implement these projects. So it is this type as a starting point that we need to look at, that this financing facility that we have stood up and we have started. These are the things that we'll look to try and address. To give you another example, my country's population is less than 20,000 people, spread over our 15 islands in the Pacific, but our islands encompass an area that is 2 million square kilometers in size. So my country is 99.99% ocean. But on each of these islands, you have to replicate the things required for a community. You have to have an airstrip, you have to have a port, you have to have a school, you have to have power generation, you have to have health facilities. All of these are replicated. My country and my island, the main island, to the northernmost island is the same distance as from London to Rome, to give you an idea again of the scale. And that's just in my country. We're not the biggest one in the Pacific. There are others that are bigger with more islands, bigger distance to travel. To seal a runway on one of our islands, it doesn't matter whether you're sealing it for 100,000 people or for 1,000 people. The cost is still the same. But the cost on a per capita basis is much, much greater, disproportionately higher for small island communities. Hence the need for innovative financing to be able to address those significantly higher costs of capital investment that makes it difficult for small island economies. Is that enough time talking?
For now.
We could carry on, but maybe for now, and then I'll pass on to the others.
Yes,
Thank you very much,
sharing
Madam
that
Moderator.
with us, Prime Minister. Speaking to the question of effective or successful strategy, we'll come back to. Thank you very kindly. Next to the Minister for Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy, Honorable Kareem James of Grenada. I have a question for you, Madam. Considering Grenada's unique environmental challenges, similar in some ways to your neighbor there from Cook Islands. Could you elaborate on how does Grenada plan to effectively utilize and manage international climate finance so that it maximizes impact on enhancing, again, climate resilience and promote renewable energy within the nation? Do feel free to tell us anything that has already been started as well. So,
Thank you so very much, Madam Moderator and Madam President of the Senate. Good evening, everyone. I bring you a warm and spicy good evening from the beautiful island of Grenada. And I'm pleased to say that the Madam Moderator is also the President of our Senate home. So I'm happy to not only be the only Grenadian on the panel. And good evening to the Honorable Prime Minister and to the rest of my distinguished colleagues. For us, Grenada is an island in the Caribbean region that, like many others, is projected to be the most significantly impacted by the effects or from the effects of climate change. And we are among many islands, and you heard it from Cook Island, that suffer highest from natural disasters, often which most of them comes from as a result of climate-induced, they are climate-induced, right? For us, we've seen it in 2004 with Hurricane Ivan, that loss and damage or damages, it can cost us up to 250% of our GDP from just one single event. And that in itself can contribute to the poor economic situation in countries like Grenada and other small island developing states. Of course, with the onset of climate change, we are projected to see an exacerbated intensity of hurricanes, storms, flooding, and to realize and understand and to really internalize that we are already in a disaster-stressed region. At times for us as policymakers, as activists for climate, for the environment, we sort of feel hopeless that despite all the efforts, despite all of these conversations and panels that we're having, we still cannot get enough access to climate finance. And when we do get access, the structures, the avenues that we have to go through is so exhausting that at times we are already set up for failure, even before a project starts, or even during the project start, we cannot implement successfully. So understanding geographically where we're located, understanding what exists currently with regards to the architecture or the mechanism for access to climate finance, the question is, how can we, in this part of the world, collaborate? How can we pull together the resources that we do have to embark on a transformational agenda that would really and truly give us the impact that we need and could ensure survival in small island developing states? And so having that understanding and having that appreciation, our government in Grenada decided that renewable energy is the way for us to go. This morning in the World Climate Action Summit, the UN Secretary General made a statement and a comment, and I found it very interesting and inspiring. And he quoted, and I'm quoting after him, and he said, "Renewable energy is the gift that keeps on giving." And it is true for us. Currently, we have a project, one of two projects that we are ongoing in for renewable energy. We have the Solar Limner project, which is an 800 kilowatt project, solar PV plant that would offset 15% of diesel fuel energy cost for one of our sister islands in Grenada. The problem with that is it is just 800 kilowatts, but we have set out targets in our national adaptation plan, in our national determined contributions to reach 40% of renewable energy penetration by 2030. And so we have an opportunity now where we can use that project to scale up and fast track on that ambitious target before 2030. But the issue is, where would the money come from? What is the structures? What are the limitations? What are the challenges to access this funding? And I think the Honorable Prime Minister phrased it correctly by saying that we don't have the economies of scale to attract investments. We don't have the technical capacity, the human resource. Even if we would get access to the financing, who would implement the projects? Who would ensure longevity at the end? Who would ensure that it is sustainable and that we can build and make it bigger? So for us in Grenada, and maybe I could safely speak for us as small island states, it is not just about climate finance, but it is about how do we place ourselves and position ourselves in a way whereby we not only look to climate finance for project funding, but we look to it to develop our local capacity. Another example of what Grenada is doing in terms of gaining access to climate finance or building our climate resilience, we have an ongoing geothermal project, which started since 2018, and we're in 2023. And most of you technical experts here, you would know that geothermal in itself is a long journey, but it goes to show that if you do not have all of the resources needed to implement the time frame in which these projects can be completed, it expands tremendously. And you know, at times as a policymaker, you tend to feel hopeless. You tend to feel as though you are fighting a cause. We are not the ones that are emitting in the large percentages. But yet still, while we try to develop our economy, while we try to build our economy and make it robust enough, we still have to mitigate against what other countries are doing to us. And renewable energy for us is one of the ways that we can guarantee our security, is one of the ways that we can transform small island developing states. For some of us, our fuel imports is as high as 30–40% of our GDP. And so, as I mentioned, because of that, the economies are therefore less competitive than those of countries with inexpensive and readily available energy for industries and businesses. But if we are able to fix, and I use the inverted commas here, if we are able to fix our energy systems and transition them to cost-effective energy supplies, then I believe that this could simultaneously build, as I mentioned, our security against supply and pricing shocks. It can contribute in our own way to global decarbonization efforts and give us an opportunity to build the kind of economic and system resilience that would allow us to adapt to projected climate impacts. And I don't want to be too controversial, but I want us to really introspect. And the question is, if, or is it fair for ratepayers, taxpayers, who are already paying some of the highest cost of electricity in the world and whose businesses are already uncompetitive, to shoulder the burden of these investments through rate-based electricity. And without climate financing for the adaptation of our electricity systems in particular, and energy systems in general, as electricity and many end-use sectors such as the transport converge, can we truly achieve a just transition? And so when we are looking at climate finance, these are the questions from a policymaker perspective we have to grapple with. But I don't like to see small island developing states, or as I like to call it, big ocean states, feel as though it is doom and gloom for us. I feel like we need to become much more confident. We need to continue to lend our voices more in the conversations in the space, and don't be afraid to demand more and to demand better structures for access to climate finance.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Thank you for ending on that positive note, away from the frustration of access. The needs-based finance is in fact intended to do just that, to invert the model of frustration around access and utilization for the strategies that work. So we'll come back to discuss that, your contribution around building the resilience in the energy sector through financing and capacity building are important points that we will discuss in the next section. So our third and final contribution in this part of the dialogue will be delivered by the chairman of the Committee for Environmental Protection of Tajikistan, one of the areas of Central Asia area where the needs-based finance is operating. Chairman Sherali Zoda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me also begin with this setting the context, because Tajikistan has a different context with the small island countries and or big ocean countries, as mentioned by my previous speaker. Tajikistan is a landlocked mountainous country with 93% of the terrain covered by mountains, and 60% of the water resources of Central Asia spring from Tajikistan's glaciers. Also, Tajikistan has a huge potential for hydroelectricity generation of the electricity, which comes from the hydro, and 98% of the energy composition comes actually from the hydropower plants. And with the potential of excess the excess of energy, generated energy, clean energy, to neighboring countries through the ongoing projects like the Central Asia Unified Grid System or the high voltage transmission line 2000 Asia CASA 1000. Also, Tajikistan is considered like as being ranked as one of the high countries with high vulnerability to climate change, with the low adaptive capacity according to different researches and rankings by different institutions. Also, we have one of the lowest GHG emissions globally. And despite this good kind of indicators in terms of being clean and in terms of the energy generation and one of the lowest emitters, we face a lot of climate-induced disasters, like that is more frequent droughts, landslides, and also the temperature increase and shift of the precipitation, which impacts the population, which around 70% of the population lives and their livelihoods depends on agriculture. And also the glaciers, which are very abundant resource in Tajikistan, as they're melting in a rapid increased pace, which causes also a lot of disasters, climate-induced disasters for us. These challenges, coupled with access to limited climate finance, poses a key challenge to tackle the impact of this negative impact of climate change. And according to the estimations, economic loss caused by these climate-induced disasters is around 50 to 60 million USD, and the forecast for the future by 2030 that this amount will increase to 130 million per year. And Tajikistan is being very proactive in terms of meeting its commitments or submitting its nationally determined contribution, where we undertook ambitious mitigation and adaptation targets. And for that, it's for the implementation of these targets, both on the mitigation and adaptation, it's estimated that 7% of the total, at least 7% of the country's GDP will be required for financing all conditional and unconditional measures identified in NDC implementation plan throughout the period of until 2030. However, the current level of climate finance is significantly below this level, and additional sources of financing will be required to strengthen the existing institutional arrangements, conduct policy and regulatory reforms, and also to do the capacity building, which are required to improve the enabling environment and also attract and manage these investments. Furthermore, the implementation of adaptation actions and conditional and mitigation actions is strongly reliant on international climate finance support. Tajikistan will use its resources for NDC implementation, particularly to fund unconditional mitigation actions. However, the availability of domestic sources has undergone significant impact from COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, funding for climate resilience and adaptation technologies is of utmost importance for us. We need funding mechanisms that are not only accessible and open, but also sensitive to our unique geographical and socioeconomic context. Investment in sustainable water management, renewable energy sources, and climate-resilient infrastructure are not mere options, but necessities for our development and prosperity. That's why the international cooperation is important for the coordination of policy strategies and institutional basis for financial planning. Throughout the technical collaboration which we received through the needs-based financing project from the UNFCCC, Tajikistan strengthened its capacity to identify needs and priorities for climate action, its capacity to formulate project programs and sector-wide approaches, and enhance its capacity to identify climate finance sources, including from domestic, but also from the private sector. And from international collaboration can offer support to agencies also, to our partners to access finance and to the finance which is blended finance and combined finance. And international cooperation should provide support in strengthening our financial management and enhance our capacity in reporting, like, and in monitoring, reporting, and verification of competencies of our specialists. And based on the above mentioned, in order to address these challenges, we need more funding mechanisms that enable us to implement crucial projects. And Tajikistan is resolute in its efforts, and we look forward to moving forward from ambition to action jointly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all the members of the panel. Now, everyone would have heard the same and different. So before I try to summarize it for opening up the conversation, let me ask each of you if you would like to respond to anything you heard from your colleague on the panel. Prime Minister, did you hear anything familiar, anything so new that you said, aha?
I think we've been talking about the same things as my colleagues here, particularly from the Caribbean countries. The same impacts they have occur, and the same in the Pacific. A little bit different, of course, with Tajikistan, a landlocked country in Central Asia, but no denying the fact that the impacts of climate, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you will be impacted by them. So I think that's the message that needs to go out. The sooner we meet our commitments to try and achieve the 1.5 degrees, the sooner, well, not the sooner, we have to do it now. As we heard, the timeline for this is very, very short to try and avert more disaster that's occurring. So carbon reduction is important to stop the glacial melt that's occurring in Central Asia, to stop the impacts of damage that's occurring in ocean countries. That is the message that I would hope in this COP resonates very strongly. And reducing carbon emissions, 80% is from the G20 countries. That's where the greatest impact will be in our G20 countries, whether developed countries or developing countries. We must find solutions and a means for them to be able to reduce their targets, bearing in mind, of course, that some of these countries have development needs as they try to lift their people out of poverty. So focus needs to be put on how to transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy. And only through collaboration will we be able to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister James?
Well, I don't want to sound too repetitive, but I would start off by the Honorable Prime Minister's ending remarks. That is only through collaboration we can do it. And I believe that capitalizing on shared resources and common challenges will enable not just Caribbean countries, but countries that share that same experience or feel the same impacts climate change is having on our individual islands. I think that if we collaborate more, we can definitely achieve the just transition that we so desire and that we are pursuing. And in order for us to do so, the access to financing, as I mentioned in the beginning, it needs to take into consideration the peculiar differences of each island state, as my colleague also stated in his presentation. So for me, I would endorse my esteemed colleague's remarks by saying that we have to collaborate and that by the end of this COP28, action. Too much talk. We've been talking for too long. Action. That's what we want.
Good. Thank you. Chairman, did you hear anything?
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Indeed, I wanted to once again maybe to reiterate and highlight what my colleague, Madam Minister, mentioned about the accessibility and affordability of the climate finance, because for certain developing countries, even to the process of the preparation of the project proposal, which is very resource and time intensive, there is a need for support on this stage already to get access for the climate finance. And Tajikistan, despite the fact that we are mentioned landlocked developing country, last year as an initiative of the president of Tajikistan, the UN adopted the resolution on declaring 2025 as International Year for Glacier Preservation. And one of the clauses of this resolution sets a goal to set up an international trust fund for glacier preservation. And Tajikistan has today our president during the delivering the national statement mentioned that Tajikistan is pledging to allocate resources for the effectiveness or activation of this international trust fund, UN trust fund. And also what was mentioned by His Excellency Prime Minister of the Cook Island, that the multilateral development banks, they offer the new offering new financial mechanism with softer conditions is also very much very important for developing countries in the path along the for the path on the climate resilient path. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you for that expansion, Chairman. So we heard, as I said, many interesting and useful points, and I'd just like to summarize 2 or 3 and then open up the floor. Clearly, this group of countries represented here today are focused on decarbonization. All the talk of who contributed what and in proportion to the other is on the table, but the central task they have identified is their commitment to decarbonize their economies. And what then is the immediate problem that they face? And I think we heard 2, overall vulnerability. 70% of the country, Tajikistan, is in agriculture, and shifts in water, precipitation, and so on have a big impact and render you more vulnerable. The island spoke about the threat to their physical infrastructure and other problems. So vulnerability is one. And the other challenge in decarbonization is the need. And that is the importance, isn't it, of the needs-based finance strategy, that it allows you to identify your own need. And which brings us to what you said, your strategies. Your strategies have to do with, in the Pacific, you spoke about aggregation, Prime Minister. Aggregation in the context of building physical infrastructure, both in your micro state context and beyond. And we heard from the other panelists about collaboration as a deliberate strategy. So I think we can really begin to interrogate again this needs-based finance strategy, how useful it has been for them. Can it really build resilience over the long haul, and where do we go with it? So the floor is now open for your consideration, your inputs. I'm not sure if there's any representative from the multilateral development banks or anybody else who would like to lead off. So the floor is open. Grenada, please identify your role in this.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And since Grenada is playing such a leading role in the head table and as moderator, I wanted to add another component to the discussion. And while we talk about collaboration, a lot of times we talk about it from external collaboration, collaboration with other countries, collaboration with international organizations, and so on. But I think there's a need for some internal collaboration. So at the country level, how we can mobilize, or especially our human resources, to take on the challenges of implementing some of the projects and programs that we are thinking about. So I think that the intersectoral approach, and in talking about intersectoral approach, I think the role of the Sustainable Development Goals as a mechanism for looking at areas for programs and projects need to be brought into the picture. I'm happy to see health being in the forefront of COP this year. And I hope that we're not talking about medicine, because a lot of people, when they hear about health, they think about sickness. But I think when we look at the SDGs, we can see how all of them are impacting the health status of populations, and by extension our human resources that can impact on our development. So I wanted to ask the panelists though, what role do you see the youth playing? Because when you talk about the sustainability and the long term, a lot of us are in the second half of our lives. And the young people are the ones who I believe have to carry the bulk of the mantle for the future. What role are young people playing in the various countries in terms of the climate resilience and contributing to our development, especially the human development?
Perhaps we can take a couple other questions, bundling them, and the panel can have 2 or 3 questions to respond to. Or a comment or a suggestion. All right, then go ahead, please, panel. How can the needs-based financing strategy respond to youth in our countries?
All right. Well, I would thank you for your multidimensional comment and question. For obvious reasons, I probably should start from the bottom, come up. I'm a young person, I'm a youth, and I'm not shy to share my age. I'm 26 years, and I'm a minister, and I'm also a sitting member of parliament for one of the constituencies in my country. So how can youth should not be the question. What the question really and truly should be is, there is a need for us to embrace the youth, and then there is a need for us to also make space on the negotiating table for our young people, because we're not waiting for nobody to sit or to tell us how we can get in the dialogue. We are already here doing this, and me being here in my portfolio is just one example of what is happening on the global scale. So I just wanted to add that. In a more official and substantive way as well, my delegation at COP this year consisted of 2 youth representatives, brilliant young people. They are students. One is enrolled at the T.A. Marichaud, our community college in Grenada, and the other one is a university student pursuing a bachelor's degree at our Lone University on campus in Grenada. And so we have the young people, not just in the developed countries, but also in our region, in our neck of the woods. Our young people have been doing a fantastic job. More persons on our delegation also came from youth organizations in the Caribbean that have robustly strived towards making young people become much more confident and comfortable. Because let's be real, when we come to these climate conversations and we come to these meetings, most times we see more mature persons, and the young people are very few. And sometimes they get intimidated to speak out. Sometimes they get intimidated to wanting to be in the conversations and to share what the experiences of climate change is like for them in their own country. And to see that there is quite a number of different fellowships, different training programs that allow them to develop themselves, to be much more articulate, to equip themselves with the right knowledge and understanding of what this climate issue and what this climate movement requires. I think that the COP conference should be commended, and the young people who have been leading that charge should be highly applauded for their initiative and their support for other young persons that want to get in this space. So it's not how can we, but it's to use this platform to encourage that little boy, that little girl from Grenada, from St. Lucia, from St. Kitts, from Jamaica, from Barbados to say, I am here and you can be here too with me. And that's why I keep going how I go. When I go back home, that's why I have that energy and that drive, because it's not as hard as we make it seem. You made a good remark on what I would summarize to and consider as mainstreaming climate change within, at the local level. Oftentimes, yes, I would say that from a policymaker perspective, we do speak, and probably I did so myself this evening as well. We speak almost always looking on the outside rather than the inside. And so it is very important for us to have not only the staff, the technical staff and the administrative staff within the Ministry of Climate Change, Climate Resilience, Environment, Renewable Energy coming into these forums. And this is for this said reason why we took a different approach for COP this year, and we ensure that health is in the dialogue, agriculture is in the dialogue, same as the thematic areas, so that when they go back, they understand that the promotion of climate resilience, the promotion of safeguarding our biodiversity and protecting our environment is not just a fight for Ministry of Climate Resilience or the ministry responsible for that charge. So we have been leading by that, and it is our responsibility now as policymakers to ensure that the regulations that we draft from our ministry, that so the consultation needs to occur not just for the target groups and the NGOs and so, but it also needs to happen for other ministries that would be involved in the process as well, indirectly and directly. So that is a conversation and a statement from you that we seriously need to internalize and introspect more and to deeper within our systems and structures on the local level. So I thank you for bringing that out. And health and climate change.
I thank you too, because there is an important point there that you're
Yes.
put on the table, and I think maybe your colleagues might want to respond, which is what can be or should be the role of young people, under this particular project, because it's going to be expanded. It is a bottom-up process in the sense that it's needs-based. What is the need that we're hearing from the young people? I think that's something that you started to.
First of all, I wanted to comment on the intersectoral approach or internal collaboration, because this is, I think, is a very important point which you mentioned in the question. Indeed, if we talk about the role of the Ministry of Environment in the countries domestically, I think as the climate change and environment is a cross-cutting issue, and the Ministry of Environment should have more kind of coordination role between different agencies. If you talk about the monitoring, reporting, and verification system of the GHG emissions, we cannot, I mean, there is a need for collaboration with the statistics agency to get the data from them and to build the system, the solid system. If you talk about the implementation of the nationally determined contributions, depending on different sectors, I mean, there is a need to cooperate with the Ministry of Agriculture or Energy or national banks. If we talk about the allocations from the national budget for the climate finance needs, we need to talk about the Ministry of Finance to have the climate tagging of their financial resources which are allocated from the public budget. And also, I mean, there is a need to, there are different ways. We either do it through the capacity building of the experts who work in different line ministries, or we allocate additional resources to have units or departments which are responsible for the climate and environment in the respective line ministries or sectors. So this is a good question, and also which is linked to the policy cohesion. We need to also think about the policy cohesion when we design some policy or we do some initiative. We need to think about the cohesion and its impact in a complex manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Prime Minister.
Yes, thank you. In terms of collaboration within countries, for us in terms of climate change is a national issue and it sits fairly and squarely within the office of the Prime Minister. So it is led from the highest level in terms of our climate change policy, even if it's cross-cutting across various different departments. And in that way, it remains as a critical component of a national policy that we develop. The role of youth, I've let my two colleagues speak on that, as they are much more youthful and able to speak with more authority on that matter. But then I recall I was once a youth myself. But in terms of what role can the youth play, well, today's youth is much more technologically advanced. In general, much of our youth are much more educated than the previous generations. They're more worldly. Many of our youth come through with a greater sense of sovereign independence. Many of our countries in the Pacific are 50, 60 years old. So these youth that come through, that have not come through a period where they lived under a colonization. So they have minds that are more attuned, if you like, to current day events. The youth are very mindful of conservation practices within our country. Practices on litter, conservation that may not have been so well regarded in past generations, in this generation is very much part of the youth that we have. So they play a critical role, but it's also important that youth are educated and that they are demonstrated with experience. Because if the failure to educate or to provide good, clear demonstrations of good practice to your youth could lead to a generation that would not have that ingrained within them. So for me, I think youth does play a very strong role, and they already do play a strong role in terms of increasing climate action, climate initiatives.
Thank you. Madam.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to make this question. My name is Sandra Guzman. I'm from Mexico. I'm the General Director of the Climate Finance Group for Latin America and the Caribbean. One of the things that we have been discussing in these negotiations is precisely the formulation, the design of a new collective goal, collective and quantified goal. And one of the elements is that this goal needs to take into account needs. However, we have been analyzing that not all developing countries have been able to estimate the cost of those needs. No? To what extent, how much do we need to implement the NDCs, how much do we need to implement the adaptation plans? And this has been creating a gap in terms of those needs. And when we talk about climate finance needs, a lot of countries sometimes it's like, okay, how much do you actually need? No? And this is a discussion that has been going. So I would like to hear from you, in your perspective, on your experience, what are these challenges to identify those needs, considering the different levels, because it's not only the central government, but also the needs of states or local communities. So if you can share the experiences that you have been having to consider, to estimate if that's has been happening, and your recommendation, like to further work on this. Obviously, we don't want further burden on developing countries, but at the same time, it's a tool that we can also do at the national level to estimate those needs, and it's a big challenge that we have been facing. So it would be great to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you so much.
Any other? Please go ahead.
Hi everyone, Carlos Villaseñor from Mexico too. I wanted to ask the panel if they have considered what are their needs besides new mechanisms from funding and the estimation of needs. If they have considered what are other things that they need, like for example in the capacity building arena, for example, like developing internal mechanisms to make use of these funds. In Mexico, for example, there has been some issues at the local level to completely implement the frameworks that they need to make use of climate change funds. Most of the states and local governments consider within the legislation the creation of a climate change fund, which provides transparency and clear rules of the game to use those funds. But most of them do not pass the stage of legislation. It's in the legislation, but it's not operative and it's not functional because they don't have the human resources, they don't have the technical capacity, they don't have anything basically to be able to implement them in reality. So I don't know if that's something that has happened in your countries where you have something within the legislation that you haven't been able to make a reality because of lack of capacity, and how that would help you like with the issue of mobilizing climate change funds.
So your question is whether or not there is adequate legislation for estimating the needs, and how does the fund can be a part of that?
Yeah, adequate legislation, but also like the capacity to transform that legislation into a tangible framework of action.
Ms. Brown?
Yep, there's two very good questions that are raised there. And it takes me back to when I first became a finance minister 13 years ago. And one of the things that was important was to articulate clearly what your needs were in order to attract investment, in order to attract funding from donors who would want to participate. In the absence of any clear policy on your priorities, that vacuum is often filled by donor partners who would come up with a priority that they think that you need. And in many cases, and history tells us, a lot of these have been failures in the past. So having a very good picture of what your needs are, having a very clear policy around investment in your country, and for most of our countries, there are two areas. Infrastructure investment, as I mentioned before, critical, whether it's around improving energy supply, improving water supply, improving roading and infrastructure. And then the other one is in terms of services that are provided, whether it's educational services, health services, and they have very different financing requirements. For capital needs, the assessments, again, for small microeconomies, they can be a significant cost in just doing the assessment themselves. So for us, the use of TAs from our MDBs has been pivotal in providing support that allows our staff to do their work plus others to help supplement, if you like, the work that's needed for an assessment. So today we have very clear assessed needs for infrastructure investment, very clear assessed needs for example, remuneration that's required to be paid out to public servants, whether they be doctors, nurses, teachers, and so forth, and a projection out over a medium-term budget timeline of 3 to 5 years of what these expected costs will be and how you're going to finance them as well. In terms of the capacity question, one of the things that we initiated in terms of our policy on aid was, as much as possible, we wanted to use local system, national systems for our monitoring and evaluation, for our financing, but also we wanted to use national capabilities, national companies, local companies to do the work. For many of the financing that we did receive, this precluded the active involvement of our own domestic companies in the implementation of projects, simply because of their international procurement process that raised the bar too high for any of our companies to be able to participate. So there was a lot of negotiation with many of these MDBs to recognize the fact that our companies would never get the reputation or the track record required to be able to bid for some of these projects when we knew that they were very capable of doing these projects. Also, being a microeconomy, you do not have the wide range of capacity that exists within your country. So for us, we have to be very adept at, firstly, the capacity building when you do need it, but also capacity supplementation on a as-needed basis that you can always bring in or contract in to help local companies meet their needs. So it's very important now that when we do look for borrowing from the likes of the ADB or others, that our own national policy on procurement is recognized so that our own capacity in country benefits from any of these projects that are going to be implemented, and that the benefit does not just flow out of the country.
So you would say that that's another impact of the program itself, that it allows the country to sort of nationalize its capacity rather than always looking externally for the skills and the talent, in addition to, of course, making the decision about need itself. Yes?
And it has the added benefit of having a local company implement. Then if the life of the project is ongoing, the maintenance and monitoring can be done in country, rather than in the past, an international company would come, do a project, whether it's an airport or a renewable project, and leave. And no capacity is left behind for the ongoing maintenance and monitoring.
Minister James, did you want to contribute?
Perhaps only to make mention to the, or respond to the first question in terms of what is the amount needed for climate finance. We have two policy documents that I've mentioned earlier, which is our National Adaptation Plan and our nationally determined contributions. And combine these two together is just shy of $700 million in order for us to implement some of these projects. But to be honest, I feel like we can't quantify how much climate finance, because we never know how a natural event, a natural disaster, what impact it would have on our economy. So separate and apart from our policy documents that we have, it can be more than that.
Thank you. I'm told that you're not hearing me.
Just to add that in Tajikistan we have conducted the quantification or identification of the financial needs for the nationally determined contribution, and we have been supported through the technical assistance to conduct this activity. And as I mentioned in my speech, we have priority areas, and for each area we have identified the projects and the amount which will be preliminary, which will be required to address those needs.
Thank you. Gentleman at the front, followed by the gentleman behind.
Thank you very much. I just want to check procedurally, I can ask a question as an observer.
What did he say? You just wanted to say what?
I am allowed to ask a question as an observer.
Yes, of course, you're in the room. Make it short. Put on your microphone again, please.
My question has to do with mitigation financing versus adaptation financing. It seems to me the outcomes of mitigation financing can seem easier to track as the impetus is carbon reduction, which you can measure and even trade. So my question is the impetus for adaptation financing, is it correct to say that that climate justice must be achieved? And if yes, is there enough recognition of this among developed economies?
Your question is, can the needs-based financing cover climate justice? Short version of it.
Yeah.
Whether it's through mitigation or adaptation. All right, next question.
Hi, my name is Nate. I'm a student based in the US, and I thank you so much for having this event. I have a question that has two parts, but basically this is a question about scale. And so the first is specifically on loss and damage, especially now that we have the Loss and Damage Fund, and hopefully by the end of COP we'll have the Santiago Network on Loss and Damage. I was curious about your experiences in terms of if does technical assistance actually help you unlock finance that you need by quantifying it? And if not, what are the barriers? And how can we learn from that in that context of loss and damage? And then a bigger question within the larger question of scale is, and this is a kind of loaded question, but is the financial system, the global financial system, fit for purpose? And if so, I'm curious on your reflections as onto why we haven't been able to achieve scale on climate finance. And if not, and if you had a magic wand, what would you want to see changed within the global financial system to help reach these issues of scale and quality in terms of climate finance? Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we've got a question back there.
Thank you very much. My question is in the same line like my friends of Mexico. I would like to know if we can use this opportunity to make a recommendation to request, for example, the LEG, the Least Development Countries Expert Group of the UNFCCC, to develop a concrete methodology or guideline to assist developing countries in order for the estimation of their needs as part of climate finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Who wants to start? Our three last questions. Can the fund, should the fund focus on mitigation versus adaptation or vice versa in the drive for finding climate justice? The question of scale. How can we use it as part of the mechanism in the global financial architecture? If I got that right. And the other question, can it finance a conference on the needs of the developing countries? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, a methodology that could help developing countries in the estimation of their climate finance needs to avoid lack of real estimation of their needs.
Yeah. So can we synthesize a methodology from what we've known so far?
Yeah, yeah, a concrete methodology, because it seems that there is no clear methodology to do so. So every country tries to use the methodology that it has at hand. And that's why we have different modalities of doing the estimations, and at the end of the day, countries are not able to estimate even at a certain percentage of precision their needs. So if we could have a specific methodology that could help developing countries at that path. Thank you.
Maybe I'll answer that quickly and ask the panel to respond to the others. It seems to me that this is a recent fund. It was started in 2017. And in some ways, it is experimental. It is by doing and considering and, in a sense, aggregating or analyzing the experiences that the winning methodologies would emerge. And they might differ from region or condition. So what works for the mountain states may not work for the island states. What works for youth in terms of understanding and assessing and achieving their needs may not for another segment of the population. So I think maybe the jury is still out on whether we need a single methodology or it's something that will emerge as we go. And so I think
I'll answer the first one, and maybe the other two can answer the other two. How's that sound? Yeah. In terms of the question asked about climate mitigation and climate adaptation, I mean, we've been very clear for many, many years now in the Pacific. Our issues are around building resilience to the impacts of climate change. As I mentioned before, you know, our contributions in the Pacific are 0.03% of total carbon emissions. So you could cut all carbon emissions in the whole of the Pacific overnight. It wouldn't make a difference at all to the impacts that climate change have. It is the rest of the world, the 80% that's generated by the G20 countries, that really is the big impact. So while that is taking place, we've always advocated that the focus of funding for Pacific countries, small island states, is on adaptation measures. But to our credit, many of our countries have also done their bit to reduce carbon emissions with climate mitigation programs. And some of it pushed because of the renewable energy is a useful form of energy for many of our small island economies, particularly solar power, which is readily available for many of our countries. So many have already converted to renewable energy, but the focus remains on building resilience to the impacts of climate change. Now, whether that's just distribution of financing is not really a matter that I'm concerned with debating or discussing. My concern is to ensure that if there is financing available, then we want it from our side to be done, to be contributing towards our resilience building and adaptation measures. There was a comment made at the opening statements as well about those that are producing fossil fuels and the companies that are involved really need to relook at their business model to an industry which supposedly is in decline. That's questionable because there are still many countries that are dependent on fossil fuel as they try to lift the prosperity levels of their peoples. But to give you an indication, the IMF tells us last year, 2022, the world spent $7 trillion on fossil fuel subsidies. This year, just last month at the Green Climate Fund Pledging Conference, we didn't even come close to the $100 billion that is needed. So it's not so much that there's no money, it's we need to redirect some of that money to where it should go. And if fossil fuel companies put aside $1.50 from every 100 that they paid out in subsidies, that would achieve the $100 billion easily. I've done my bit, Honourable Minister.
thank you, Prime Minister. Minister James?
Well, I think the Honorable Prime Minister really gave justice to the first question as well, but I would say while both mitigation and adaptation are important For Grenada, the immediate one would be adaptation, simply because for the reasons that I've outlined earlier on in this conversation. To contextualize it to your question, I think that there is a broad consensus, and we can agree that there is a broad consensus on the importance of climate justice. The specifics of what it entails and how it should be achieved, it can vary widely, and they are subject to ongoing debates and negotiations. So from our perspective, it will definitely be adaptation.
Thank you, Minister.
Being mindful of time, I will keep it short. Definitely for Tajikistan, as I mentioned, we are one of the lowest emitters globally. Adaptation is a priority, but nevertheless, we have the potential to help other countries, neighboring countries, to achieve their net zero ambitions through exporting this clean and cheap energy through the existing grid systems. But regarding the question on the is it enough to have this TA to technical assistance to quantify climate finance needs? It's not enough. It's rather initial step. There are, as I mentioned, that affordability and accessibility of climate finance is an issue and challenge for developing countries because you need to invest a lot of resources to prepare a fully fledged project proposal to submit it to some global funds or to the MDBs for financing. So rather the TA to identify and quantify the climate finance needs is initial step rather than the end of the journey.
Thank you, Minister. In closing, let me thank all those of you who have, first of all, let me thank our panelists with a round of applause from us all. And I wish to thank you, the audience, as well, for your engagement. I would also like to thank the organizers for this panel, Grant Kirkman and his team, and the hardworking Paula and others. Thank you very much. This is an initial conversation. I'm coming into it new as well. I'm not sure how often it's been held, but it really has enriched something important for us. There's a basket of financing mechanisms across the climate change domain here in UNFCCC and outside of it. And yet, we are straddled, with galloping problems in the countries which this new fund serves. So obviously, it fits a need. And I would say that we have heard this evening that these three countries are involved in exercising responsibility for decarbonization and for saving people and planet, from what they are doing. And we've also heard that they're seeking to take greater control, right? To decide on the physical infrastructure, to decide on which kind of renewable energy, to save the damages from, these unnatural and unprecedented glacial melts. So countries are, in fact, seeking to take greater control, and that is exactly where the fund fits. And it's innovative, it's new, it's experimental in many ways. But it means that there is a tool at your disposal, ministers, Prime Minister. There is a tool at your disposal, whether it's for youth, for agriculture, with your neighbors, for your airports, and so on. And to that extent, the paradigm is shifting, that you will have greater and greater control over what kind of fund, who gets access to it, and how it's needed. So it's an opportunity that we hope will be at the disposal of countries as we seek to save ourselves and undertake our own obligations to the larger system. Thank you very much, and see you next year.